guys, Tiffany here from Tiffany Gordon Cosplay with a video on how to make your own Hylian shield from Zelda. And let me first start off by saying a big thank you to my Twitch sub community for who voted on this prop to make in one day. And in total, it took me 7.5 hours to build this shield. And if you would like to help choose my next one-day cosplay prop build, please consider subbing to me on Twitch. Now, on to making the shield. For the shield, we used my 2D blueprint for the Hylian shield, which is available on my website, www.tiffanygordonCosplay.com, or you can see the link below. And once we had the blueprint all taped together, I cut out each of the pieces for the bird on the shield, and then traced each of those bird pieces onto 2mm EVA foam and cut out with an X-Acto knife. And here's what all of the pieces should look like once they're cut out. And now for the triangle pieces. I first started off by tracing the inner shape of the triangle onto 12mm EVA foam and extending the lines on the inside of the triangle to the edge of my EVA foam. This is important to help guide you for where you're going to use the Logan's CosTool Straight Bevel Cutter, which will cut all of your EVA foam pieces at an angle. I do, however, recommend using a EVA foam that is less than 12mm in thickness because this tool did not quite cut all the way to the bottom, so something around 8mm or 10mm would probably work best. I repeated the same process for all three of the triangles. Next is for the S snake shape pieces. And again, I traced both of the shapes onto 12mm EVA foam with a Sharpie, as well as adding a center guideline, and we'll use that later. I then proceeded to cut out these pieces using a box cutter, and then cut out the pieces using our center guideline as an indicator for cutting all of our pieces at an angle with an X-Acto knife. And here's what the before and after should look like. I then took the S-shaped pieces to my workbench and then using a sanding drum, sanded all of the pieces until they were smooth. The final detail pieces that we're going to cut out are all of the little circle rivet pieces for the shield's trim. And again, using 12mm EVA foam, I used CosTool's Circle Cutter to cut the size of the circles that I wanted, and then sanded the top half so it looked like a round dome. Now to talk about the main part of the shield. If you want the shield to be flat, then you can just cut it as is from the blueprint. However, I wanted there to be a slight curvature. And to do this, I cut the shield blueprint in half, but having it where it slightly goes a little bit wider in the center and then goes back to the center point at the top. This is gonna make it so when you have two halves come together, you'll have a slight raised part in the center. And depending on the height that you want of this will depend on how far away you should go from your center line. So if you want it to be less of a curve on your final shield, you'll want to cut closer to the center. If you want it to be a higher curve, you'll want to cut farther away from the center. Next, I traced this piece twice onto 12mm EVA foam and cut out with a box cutter. And here's what the two halves should look like. And for attaching the two pieces together, I applied contact cement glue to both the seams of the shields, letting each one fully dry before attaching them together. And a helpful tip for attaching your two halves together, start at the bottom using the table to apply pressure to both sides and slowly roll your pieces together, working your way to the opposite side, always leaving the part that you're attaching touching the table. This way your pieces will align perfectly and you won't have any messed up seams. And now for the trim of the shield, and for this I cut it up into 4 different sections. Tracing each one again on 12mm EVA foam, as well as adding a tiny bit of extra seam allowance on either of the ends. This is gonna make it so that way when we cut it, your pieces will come to a point and you'll have that extra material to work with. And once that was done, I then cut each piece out with a box cutter. And each of these trim pieces do not go straight up and down. They do have a slight cut angle around all of the inside part of the trim. So I did a guideline around all of this with a Sharpie, and then proceeded to cut each of the pieces at a 45 with our guideline with a box cutter. And here's what all the pieces should look like so far. I then went to my workbench and sanded each of the ends with a sanding drum at a 45, having the top half of the trim being longer than the bottom half. This is going to make it so when the two halves come together, it'll have a slight point at each of the ends, as well as smoothing out all of our cut 45 pieces. Next, to attach each of the pieces, and again, we used contact cement glue, this time applying it to each of the end pieces, letting them fully dry, and then attaching each of the pieces together to make one trim piece. Now that you have one piece for the trim, it's time to trace where it's going to go on the shield. And because we did add a little bit more of a bend to the shield, the trim will not go to the exact edges. So you will want to kind of see where it's going to go and trace it so you know where to apply your glue. And then you can apply the contact cement glue to the back half of the trim as well as to the top half of the shield, again letting both pieces dry before attaching them together. And for attaching the trim, I start by doing little tack attaches to the bottom and the top, and then I use little Sharpies or whatever I have laying around to kind of hold the other pieces in place so they don't attach the contact cement glue. And then slowly work my way around and it'll all lay nice and flat. And then using a box cutter, cut away all of the excess foam. Now to add the details. And for this, I used the blueprint to kind of indicate where to add the head of the bird, and then slowly lay out all of the rest of the bird pieces and trace them where they were going to go, and attach them again with contact cement glue. I continued to do the same process with all of the triangle pieces as well as the S snake pieces, and also the little rivets on the edges of the trim. The last step of the shield build is to cut out the triangle pieces on the trim. And to do this, I used an X-Acto knife, having a center guideline of each of them and cutting at a slight 45 towards the center around each of these triangle pieces. Once you're done with doing it on all three of the sides, you should be able to remove the centerpiece and have the negative shape of a triangle. And that, guys, is how I made my Highland Shield from Zelda in one day out of EVA foam. Thank you guys so much for watching this little tutorial, and big thank you also to my Twitch sub community for choosing what I would make in one day for this prop build. And if you liked the video, give me a like, comment on if you found this helpful, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you for our next video, which will be painting this shield, coming soon.